I'm just really excited to have Joe and Michèle here with us today. They are two filmmakers I just respect so much. As Erica said, this is kind of a first to have guests on whose films are opening theatrically today as we speak. In fact, I think Michèle, you're going to be at the Film Forum tonight, are you not?
Yes, New York City Film Forum, and I'd like to say that our screening is sold out tonight, where I'll be doing the Q&A. And Joe is zooming in from Los Angeles, where we're having our LA theatrical premiere. Joe, you want to tell us where that is?
At the Royal Limley in the land of La. So
Monica Lemley.
Okay, thank you, Michèle.
Didn't they do a musical called The Land of La with Ryan Gosling? Yeah.
Oh, I think that had another La in it, but
yeah, that's it. La La, right.
So this is my ancestral home, and I'm going to mention it because I think it's integral to my development as a filmmaker. So, how are you, Doug?
I'm great, except for my internet connectivity. Everything else is. Anyway, you're from Central LA, right, Joe?
Yes, I'm born in West LA. Grew up here. Have an interesting relationship with the city, but it's actually pretty lovely now.
Michèle, though, you're from Haiti, am I right? In Panama?
Yes, I'm originally from Haiti. I was born there. My dad is Haitian, was Haitian. He passed away a couple of decades ago. And my mom is from Panama. And we immigrated when I was very young. We were sort of fleeing the Duvalier dictatorship because I had a family that was very politically involved in issues down there. So, yeah. But grew up mostly in New York and Canada.
So this is a question for both of you. What did you want to be when you were a kid? What did you want to, grow up thinking you wanted to be? Certainly not a documentary filmmaker.
So in kindergarten, I looked up the highest paying job that I could find, and it was an actuary, which is a very specialized accountant. They made $25,000 a year. So that is what I was going to be. And I've dedicated my life to mathematics. So I studied math. I was a math major until the second year of college, when someone came up to me and said, "There are not enough Black doctors in this world. Why don't you switch?" And I'm thinking, actuary, boring, doctor, save lives. So I decided to go to medical school. How about you, Michèle?
Yeah, Michèle.
I, as a child, actually wanted to be a dancer. It was part of certainly our family existence and life. My parents actually taught me how to dance on many levels. From a very young kid, I was on the floor a lot at family gatherings, but they actually were not hot on the idea of making that a career. So there was never enough time dedicated to it fully for myself. So I became more politically oriented, given the background and the community I came up in, and decided to do work in human rights and social justice.
As a lawyer, right?
As a lawyer, first in international development, And I got very discouraged by the systemic structures that were present. I worked with the UN for 3 years, and then decided that with law, I could possibly be more directly involved in trying to create change, even if it's at an individual level. And that's when I met Joe. And then he changed, meeting him sort of changed my course. I became completely bitten by film. And I think back to this sort of roots of really wanting to do something creative since a young child.
So the big point is that math and law and politics is what brought us or our initial ambitions, but they really inform how we become our entry into film. They're really a large part of why we make film and why we think is important. And so we are, my family fled, not Haiti, but they fled Texas. And people call it the mass migration, but they really fled because of lynching and inability to find work. And we were part of this huge migration to Los Angeles. And what I found growing up is inequality. And I really pledged to my father's a preacher. He had a large church on the east side of LA. And I asked him to explain why God allowed the discrimination that I was experiencing as a 10-year-old. And he couldn't explain that for me. Oh, he explained it, but at that point I decided, I had to take matters in my own hands, and I had to stand up for what I thought was right. What ultimately both of us decided is that storytelling and narrative was as powerful as anything else we could do. And I realized that storytelling is part of a family tradition that really excites me. And so I left medical school. I'm sorry. I left medicine. I had graduated from medical school and was working in Massachusetts to come to New York and learn to be a storyteller. Interesting. I was already a storyteller. I tried to learn cinema, and that took me about 12 years. While I was learning, I met Michèle. She had come from Africa, where she was a humanitarian, is what I was saying, and then realized that the people who were giving the money were benefiting more than the people they were giving the money to. Anyway, it's a long story, but that's where we started from, and our initial foray into film and storytelling.
I think the idea that, in some ways narrative is everything, right? We're feeling that certainly right now these days. And exploring nonfiction, storytelling, in some ways, for me, certainly goes back to even how narrative helped, my coming of age and better understanding myself, my family, where we come from, that we need narrative to not just make sense of our lives, but understand our place in society and what challenges exist. And it has, in some ways, I feel, a deeper impact than any kind of legislation can have to a certain extent. So it's on multiple levels.
And not only for others, but the history that we learn, the stories that we tell, fulfill us as humans, and so it's a very exciting, because you get a chance to treat yourself and then provide narrative as well. Um, and so I know that we like to talk, so we're going to listen to your question, Doug. What do you want to know? What do you want to know about us?
Oh, I have so many questions for you. We could probably do this whole thing on just American Promise and, personal documentary filmmaking, but we're going to go beyond that and talk about your whole career arc and stuff because it's really fascinating. You, Joe, started in fiction films. Your first film was your first film called The Keeper? Was that your first fiction feature? And it was after you
So,
did
so,
it was two
yes.
years as a prison psychiatrist at the Brooklyn House of Detention.
So I had a girlfriend who worked for the city of New York, and she hired staff for the prison system. And then she said, mm, would you work for us? And I said, no, I'm not interested. And she says, you can write a script. And I'm thinking, okay, got you. So I went and I worked for 2 years. And the interesting thing about the prison system is that you have to be protected. So there's always a correctional officer sitting within a few feet from me. And but since they were so scarce, I had a lot of time doing nothing. So I spent the time in a law library listening to the stories of the correctional officers. And what dawned on me was they were very funny, but more importantly, the relationship between prisoner and correctional officers is very interesting. They grew up in the same communities. They had some of the same issues. They saw the world similarly, but they were on two sides of the same bars. And so I thought it was an interesting way of coming to. I realized it was an interesting way of coming to terms with my position in that environment. So I
But
wrote.
just to note, you were entering just as the correction officers were being diversified. There was greater representation of people from the community as corrections officers, and that's part of what was going on there. So they were Black corrections officers.
Exactly. And so, but to dial back a little bit, I came to New York wanting to be a filmmaker, documentary, but I fell into this group of they were called Yugoslavian at the time. They were from Serbia, Croatia, Montenegro. They were all amazing filmmakers who basically we would sit and talk and create and make shorts together. Uh, Unfortunately, halfway through that experience, the country split apart and then they began to hate each other. It was an amazing uh, turn in terms of these friendships, uh, which they all separated. But that was my education. I think we must have written just tons of short scripts, made short films, and that was my education. So I like switched from making documentary and learning documentary to making short films. So I made a number of short films before the Keeper.
I was actually about to start law school when I met Joe, and he was working on his first short, which was a fiction short called Aibobo, and I jumped on in production on the production end on as associate producer working on that, and the Keeper. The Keeper has a bit of a while he was working the script. We put a bit of twist. There's some Haitian cultural elements in the film if you see it. But Joe actually encouraged me to work in documentary film and try to get my first short done actually while I was in law school. And so I took a couple of very short workshops. Back in the day, there was Film Video Arts collective in downtown Manhattan. I don't know if people know about that, but it was a collective where we could all come, you know, you could exchange equipment. And I also took a production course from Jennifer Fox, which I remember. She kind of changed my life. So I was taking these small workshops, both for video and production and editing that sort of became immersive. And then I did my first short film actually while I was in law school, documentary film. And so
It was called We Choose to Rap.
yeah, it was about an Afro-Brazilian feminist hip hop artist that I would shoot over the weekends in Sao Paulo while I was doing my legal internship during the day and during the week. So that's how I got my teeth into the process. And I have to say, I really became enamored with the documentary film process because certainly working with these young women, there was something happening in the relationship that felt sort of powerful, as well as, you know, working on the film and being able to tell the story from a different perspective or a certain perspective that could later be shared. And so I really enjoyed that in some ways more than the fiction aspect. Although I'm coming full circle now, and I think we're leaning more towards fiction these days, or towards some sort of hybrid sort of storytelling where we rely less on the sort of power dynamics that exist in documentary filmmaking with subjects and participants and filmmakers who hold a camera. And so it's kind of interesting to see that evolution. I actually wanted to quit law school, but Joe encouraged me not to because there's no what you would call trust fund bank account where we're concerned. So we're actually kind of the sandwich generation for me in terms of, well, now my kids are sort of grown, but at the time it was about thinking about my mother and how to support her and our kids as they grew up. And so the legal degree helped quite a bit. And so yeah, so we were working together and separately at the same time. So I spent some time with the organization Witness. That was sort of this transition into full-time filmmaking because it combined, for those of you who don't know Witness, it was started in the late 1990s after the Rodney King tapes around the Rodney King beating came out between Peter Gabriel and the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, which is now called Human Rights First. They created this organization where we were going to distribute cameras across the world to human rights activists to document human rights abuses. So I was part of that initial creation of that organization that now it's quite huge. And that became a transition for me where I eventually really wanted to do just film full-time and personal storytelling. What's interesting about that is we know how the Rodney King trials ended, right? That everybody was acquitted in spite of the video documentation. And I think we're living some of that today, whether over the years, how video documentation now is not even enough, right? It's not even enough in terms of telling the truth. And this is where sort of narrative is so important in terms of people being able to understand their world through narrative that in times can support or not what their eyes actually see.
I wanted to say one thing. This is lesson number one for us. These events occurred in the late 80s and 90s. So we're talking almost 40 years ago. And lesson number one for us is, how do we survive?
30, let's just not, let's just not add another 10 years there, because
Okay, okay, my math is off. I guess I should
yeah,
have.
mid-90s for me.
Okay, there you go. So, but the reality is, uh, many of the people we started with are no longer making film, and because the system for us required us to tell a different kind of story than we wanted to tell. Uh, and I think the reason, and we were offered some of those jobs, and we did not take them. What we had was a house that we bought on her lawyer's salary for, I don't know, no money down in Brooklyn where no one wanted to live. And that's really sustained us. It's been very important for us, for our independence as independent filmmakers, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we come from careers where we could have been comfortable, right, with what we were doing, but did not feel personally fulfilled or our souls fulfilled. And so this choice to go into storytelling, nonfiction and fiction, was really about fulfilling not just a passion, but a commitment to independence and storytelling that we feel can certainly change us and sort of change our communities, and the idea of leaving something behind that can have an effect. And so money was, it wasn't about, it was about being, stable, but also about how do we carve out this stability and maintain independence where we're not sort of necessarily compromising. And I think luckily, public media has been a big sort of supporter of our work along this journey that allowed us to also to maintain a certain level of independence. It also means that, our filmmaking process, our product takes time in certain cases. In some cases it's intentionally long, like American Promise was over 13 years, where we knew we had to navigate parenting, this filmmaking that we loved, but also paying our bills. And that allowed us, that was an intentional, 13 years. Excuse me.
I'm not sure it was that. The Let me question the intentionality of that. The reality is that you came to me and said, I want to study documentary. And can you go back to work so that I study? And I'm thinking, no, that sounds like a bad idea. And so we made an agreement, is that she would study documentary. 5 years seemed like a very long time for me not to play with the art. So we started making American Promise. It wasn't called that, with a consumer camera, and we were shooting now and then our son, and not even his best friend. And so that was the compromise. And we were locked into the 13 years, but really was an opportunity for me to continue to do something which was not narrative filmmaking, while she perfected her craft. She made several films during that time period.
You also made a fiction film during that time period too, The Killing Zone, which was the second fiction film during American Promise. And I finished a documentary that was largely commissioned by the Ford Foundation at the time, and we did a couple of shorts during that period. But American Promise started out with a specific intention, but those 13 years were, we could see that at the end of high school, we'd hopefully be able to have something that was powerful. And, characters came and went, participants came and went during that year, but the steady constant was, of course, our family. But our films, because they're independent, take a while. I did a documentary called Stateless. That was a 5-year project, what had to do with bringing, funding in, nonprofit funding, both here and in Canada, actually, which was looking at the Dominicans of Haitian descent and what they were facing in the Dominican Republic, they became stateless in 2013, over 200,000 folks down there. And then our most recent project, Going to Mars, was a 7-year project. Not that we haven't been working throughout. Yes, we've done a lot of short form commissioned work as we work on these longer sort of from scratch independent pieces, as we get the funding for them.
So Michèle, you're talking about the work, and I would like to talk about the other part of the work. We intentionally did the kind of work that the family could stay together. So we would shoot and involve our families in all kinds of ways. And so what it means, and so we were creating an ecosphere or a community where we would nourish ourselves through the relationships we were developing with other makers. And so we were not leaving generally, for the most part, for many of these years, to go to faraway lands. I mean, we've done some of that, but I think we were intentional about the part of filmmaking that's community building. And that was very interesting, because many of those relationships with other filmmakers are still in existence. They're the same names on our film. I'd say 20 years later. Michèle would say 10, because she likes to chop off time. That the other interesting thing is that we support other filmmakers who were part of our system, and we're helping to make their film. And interesting enough, both of our sons are becoming makers. Not solely because of the love for storytelling, but it's a part of their process. It's part of what happens when we're at the dinner table. And we Michèle was thinking about doing a piece about her mother, and she asked her son to interview her mom. It was an amazing effing interview. And all I could think of, he has sat through so many interviews in the living room that he knows how to listen. So what I am saying is this, and I'm trying to make this different. It's not about the film, it's about the life. And it's about creating community. And part of that is our family, but part of it is the community of filmmakers who help us produce these films, but also as a part of a larger community that we think is very interesting thing to talk about, because we've refused to make certain stories that promote a master narrative of who's good and who's bad. And what we notice, particularly in the public media, they've allowed us to tell those stories, which they might make white people uncomfortable, but actually are more liberating. And so what we and I think that's why we I'm sorry, folks from LA. That's why we didn't leave our little home in Brooklyn, is because we were constantly getting support. Okay, you guys are a little weird, but we support you. And so that creation of this community is bigger than, you know, the crew. It's about
Yeah, it's about, I think, vocation and not career, right? This idea of centering purpose and relationships that are supportive both amongst our peers, ourselves as mentors, or ourselves as mentees, you know, that relationship. St. Clair Bourne, a seminal filmmaker, pioneer, was someone who also introduced me to the space in a way that was very nurturing. And I use that as my point of reference in how I walk in this space as well.
I want to get back to American Promise because we have a lot of filmmakers here grappling with personal documentaries. And this is like the mothership of personal documentaries. It's just a fascinating film. And you mentioned earlier power dynamics, and there's nothing more difficult. Having made a film about my daughter that was also a longitudinal film called The Kids Grow Up,
Mhm.
there's nothing more challenging than navigating the power dynamics. So tell us a little bit about how, you know, Idris felt during these 13 years, particularly as he got older. You know, I can see you started filming when he was 5. And I imagine it was fun for him for a while. And then there got to a point where, you know, it wasn't as much fun. So I'd like you to address that and also address your role as parents in the film. You were quite harsh on on Idris at times in the film, and you know, many filmmakers would have taken that out in the editing or softened it in the editing, and you did not. And I'm curious, what were the factors in all those, in all that decision making and navigating?
Well, let me start by saying this. Uh, uh, no, I'm not gonna be defensive. I'm gonna say this, that we didn't know what we were getting into. This is the so we learned along the way. Not only that, we didn't know how to be parents. He was our first child. Uh, but the process was amazing because we used the same process that we're talking about earlier. So my son is a very kind and politically astute and generous person. Now, I like to brag, so I apologize, but he was voted 40 for 40, or 30 under 30 in education. He had an exhibition looking at MoMA this past year. So what he does is he calls himself an archivist, where he excavates stories of primarily women and BIPOC Americans who've been disappeared from history. And so he has a collective, and so I'm pointing out some of the similarities that I talked about earlier, of like-minded 20-year-olds who help create these images in augmented reality space. So I think that he has taken some of that process from us, But we didn't start with that process. We started want to make a film. We wanted to do Michael Apted, and we realized that Michael Apted wasn't going to work for us because it was once every 7 years, and we only had 14. And so we basically started shooting more frequently. So the trust process was everything. And so how do you get a 4-year-old to trust you? He does. It was not an issue. It didn't become an issue until the other parents in the school decided, what are you doing? And how is it going to impact my son? Specifically, will my son be considered a racist if he's in your film? And so, and that was easy. They just dropped out of the film. And so, but what we learned along the way is to be more sensitive to his needs. He didn't start backing away from the camera until he was almost, what, 14, 13? And when he asked the questions, we answered the questions. They were constantly being asked at the dinner table. But I think he didn't really think twice about staying in until he was much later, around 16, 17. So Shayon had, the other kid had more difficulties with the notion of being filmed. And the interesting thing is that he dropped out of the film on multiple occasions. But what he found is that coming to our home and sitting was where he liked to be when he had time off. It was a safe place. So he watched us make other films. And he actually asked to re-involve himself with the filmmaking process. And after the death of his brother, he spent quite a bit of time in our home, lying on the couch, spending time with my son. So over the course of many years, I said we developed a relationship where there was a discussion about the process. It got more difficult later on. And we talked about the politics. At one point, I told my son, he was 18, that I needed to make this film, that he had a choice, but I needed to make this film because it was not just for him at this point. That what we had learned, that there were tens of thousands of kids who were struggling with his struggle, and that we could make a difference in terms of how people were treated. Now, what I would say, and Michelle,
Can I say something?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Few things, and this is about the illusion of documentary film, right? This illusion, this journalistic illusion that I kind of stay away from, that what you see is everything, right? When there are constant choices and elements of manipulation that we engage in. The question is, do we buy the manipulation as an audience or not? So it's really about that. And then all of the things that happen off camera that are not shot, not filmed, that have to do with the everyday parenting, right? This idea, one, that the camera was on us all the time is untrue, right? We shot very strategically over the years. Secondly, the same way that Idris and Shayon's personalities, characters are molded throughout the film, so is ours as parents. So is the school, or the two schools. They are the result of choices we made with editors to reflect a certain dramatic arc. And in this case, we as parents took the hit that was less potentially balanced in our actual day-to-day parenting, but to really make a point that is a larger truth that I think in some ways relates to even Nikki, when Nikki says in Going to Mars, I remember what I remember, and what I don't remember, I make up, because that is what storytelling is. Now, I don't want to say that we make up in American Promise, but these are very intentional choices that were elements of huge debate between editors and ourselves, and how we were going to be portrayed. And what we told our editors was, there are no holds barred bars to how you portray us, because for us, the priority is that the audience be cheering for these young boys from the first frame to the last frame. And if it means working through obstacles so a greater truth of their own humanity is revealed at the end, then we'll take those punches. And
I
so
took more punches than you.
yes, and I won't go into the depth of it, but this was largely your choice in it, because we had that discussion also about trying to soften up certain elements as well. But there was money involved in terms of, and deadlines. But for us, the dramatic arc was hugely important, that we keep cheering for the boys, that Idris's obstacles be felt to a certain extent, and that we not necessarily soften it, even though the reality is a lot softer.
I'm really curious. I totally get the strategy of where you, as the filmmaker in a personal documentary, can't look better than your participants. You have to take the blows and be the butt of jokes, or look harsher than you might actually even be as parents. I'm really curious if, because you do both come off harshly at points in the film, were the reactions different when it played to Black audiences than to white audiences? Were you judged harsher by white audiences? I'm really curious about that.
Absolutely. It wasn't completely different, but let me say, we tried to take our film to England. What were we told, Michelle? That this does not exist. The issues of implicit bias, unconscious racism, it is not a thing in England. We went to England, that audience cried for an hour.
Let me just, I just got to intervene on this. This is not what the question is necessarily about. The question is, are white audiences more enraged about our parenting than Black audiences in terms of looking at the film? And I have to say that the one thing is that Black parents, educators in the school system, not only were big supporters, but were championing the film because they understood that the lives of these young men was at stake. We're talking about their own lives being at stake, opening up a conversation that needed to be had both around education and parenting, and also seeing themselves reflected both as children or young adults, but also as parents themselves, trying to navigate and figure things out. Some of the biggest things that were left out, that were exposed in the film, was the parent conversation at the table that is true today as it was true 10 or 20 years ago, about how do you educate a young Black man who, when he walks out to the street, we don't know what might happen, right? Or even in the classroom, right? How do you handle that as parents? On the white side, there was this obsession, certainly in the United States, I don't want to talk about England, with the so-called unquote, more authoritarian parenting, and the agency of the young boy, of Idris. We don't ask those questions of white filmmakers going to India or Africa and filming, documenting children in those. In fact, Academy Awards have been granted to those power relationships, with those power relationships never being questioned, both in reviews or elsewhere. And so what we were battling was this idea of thinking about just our craft as filmmakers, and thinking about how the story unfolds, the longitudinal nature of it, versus this obsession with an agency, the agency of those involved in the film, which I feel were distractions, because the audience we were speaking to was essentially our audience, ourselves, and really figuring out this problem of systemic racism in the educational system through these personal stories, these Black middle-class families.
Michèle Stephenson, I was getting to that. So I was going to answer that question. And so, but what I would say is that how we've changed over time is we don't give a shit. In other words, so this is how Nikki was created. We don't soften for white audience or Asian audience, or we don't kowtow. We're basically making the film for ourselves, because it's a no-win situation for us. We lose by making our message more palatable when we think our message is quite palatable but complex. So I remember, I don't want to out anybody, but I will. So Wendy Levy called me after reading some review up in San Francisco, and she said, wow, they really give you a hard time on your character. She says, Joe, you must be doing something right. And so I realized later on, we're always, we were thinking too much about would the art be accepted? Would the message be difficult for some people? And so, and since it's not a streamer, we've been pushing for our own independence from gaze, Gaze. And so that's what you're getting nowadays. And it's a part of every film that we've done. Michèle just did an episode of Black Power movement in Canada. It is an amazing story, and the movement for equality and self-respect goes through Canada. But Michèle had the censors on her, and she made. You didn't have the censors on you? Okay, so
Oh yeah, go for it.
Why don't you tell your story? The reality is, she felt that the language that was used in the 60s and 70s by Black Canadians, including the N-word, needed to be in the piece. And the Canadian censors tried to remove it. And she fought for that. But the ability to fight for your message and how you tell the story and who has agency in the story was a 30-year journey, 40-year journey for us, for me, and a 12-year journey for Michèle. You want to say something, Michèle? Did I get something right?
No, I'm good. I just that it was, we as a, it it wasn't just me. We were a core group of a producing team, that really were invested in keeping the N-word being spoken by the elders who were interviewed in recounting their stories, and we were able to keep it. Yeah.
But the take home is that we've evolved over the years to argue these points, but the reality is that we're safe because we live in our own place, and our kids are safe, and so the risk is not high. But we've learned that there's no upside to and I think one of the things I want to mention is that we've made a lot of PSAs for very rich people, and no, let me be more kind. We made a lot of PSAs for clients, and we've seen them alter our message to fit their needs, and we've hated every one of those films. So we stopped doing that.
Now, this is not to say that compromise doesn't happen. There obviously is compromise. The question is, to what extent and how? And how do you stay in tune with even understanding your own sort of purpose as these compromises hit you from all different parts, right? And thinking about it, just being aware of it at each step is really important, because there's always going to be compromise. It's the nature of filmmaking. The question is, to what extent and what kind, right?
Yeah, well, I'm just curious. I read an interview, I think it was Joe with you and your producer, Tommy Oliver, on the Going to Mars project, where Tommy said he shouldn't even have had the ability to join the film, that funders should have obviously seen the potential of the Nikki Giovanni Project over the years. Can you speak to the challenges of being filmmakers of color? Do you find that was the issue, or is it just documentary in general is impossible to get funding for? It's just so competitive. How did it take 13 years to get American Promise? Well, I know you were filming over that time, but was that a tough one to get finishing funds for? What were the issues with the Nikki Giovanni Project?
So, Michelle, you always let me go first, and then you correct
He
me.
asked you the question about
Oh,
the
okay.
Tommy Oliver interview, yeah, where he said that.
So the answer is American Promise had a lot of fans early on. Simon Comeri came in early, not early, but 7 years in, and there were people in the community. There was a program at Tribeca. It was called Tribeca All Access, and they realized our skill level because they had seen some of our prosumer camera docs, and they introduced us to everyone they thought was powerful in the city of New York over a matter of a month or so. It changed our trajectory, but and so it also allowed us to have a smoother sailing with that film in terms of financing. In fact, it was interesting that we got.
Just one thing I want to add to that about American Promise is that there were gatekeepers in place, program officers in the place, from Ford Foundation to Open Society Foundations, even as well MacArthur back in the day when they were giving the films, who were largely Black and BIPOC, who understood the story and advocated for this story from inside, from down within the foundations that were funding film. And we would not have been able to make that film without those advocates in those key places. I'm pretty sure that we might still be making American Promise now if they had not been present and ready to advocate, because they saw themselves and their lived experiences reflected in these clips that they saw. Sorry to interrupt, Joe.
But I'm going to answer this question, but you're going to force me to talk about they turned us down initially, and I was on the subway, and we met the program officer for Soros, and she was talking to me about this and how they couldn't support it. And I said to her, if you look at the achievement gap with African Americans, it goes up. The gap between white and black goes up as blacks earn more money. And so it is not something that you can just fix by dealing with poor people or the underclass. And she was so shocked. She said, "I want you to be in my office the next day." And we presented that to the staff there. And that was the beginnings of a outreach campaign, which was pretty amazing. People don't know that program was funded from 20 organizations, almost over $1 million. And that received an award for the most impactful outreach program worldwide in 2014. That being said, we pitched American Promise and found it very, very difficult to get funding, and we got the usual public sources, NISCA, Brooklyn Arts Council.
And Black Public Media. Again, it's all of these had these key sort of program officers who were recognizing it. So I think that to your question about, yes, independent filmmaking, documentary filmmaking is extremely difficult to raise money for and finish. We know the average sort of independent documentary film takes about 5 years to make, in some cases longer. There are, though, particular challenges, certainly to BIPOC filmmakers and Black filmmakers in particular, that have to do with how our stories are seen when they are told by us, right? And what is the perception and how they are funded, right? And we experienced that with Nikki Giovanni. It took us 7 years. It should not have taken us 7 years, but we used that to our benefit because it allowed us to explore the creativity of the film to a whole other level. Had we gotten immediate funding over 2 years, it would have been a different film, and I would say probably not as complicated and layered as it is now. And the ability to be with Nikki over 7 years and film her also provided this added sort of intimate weight to the film. But the obstacles had to do with, one, the funders who were out. I mean, there were the funders who were funding us because they had funded us before, which is great, and they kept going. Ford Foundation also. But then the new funders, or this idea of potential investment, this is a largely white community with quite a bit of money, many who did not know Nikki, and many who may have not really been necessarily comfortable with our storytelling. I don't know. So that took a while.
Well, I do know that I think they were uncomfortable with our storytelling because we went to Catalyst with one of 6 films. There were of color projects. We were the only
of color subject matter. Yeah,
we were the only group that didn't get funded, and there were large amounts of money going around. And it was clear to us and to Catalyst that our message was discomforting.
Our message was discovered, and they did not know Nikki Giovanni. So there was that extra.
They didn't know the characters in these other movies as well. And what I am saying is that
that's true. They didn't know those folks either. That's true.
And so that's always an excuse. So because what happens is this: they provide the information from their collective memory of who Nikki is. She's a radical. I would dispute that based on her vote for Clinton. But okay. Well, she wouldn't deny that. But what I would say is that there is a projection of what we're trying to say, and we have to dispossess these funders of what that message is. Oh, this is who you are. They would be shocked if we were. They knew that we were.
And that's the first hurdle. But to their credit, Catalyst understood this and started to sort of diversify their wealth investors, in there, so that gap could be sort of bridged. And that's how Tommy Oliver came in. Tommy Oliver was a Catalyst sort of investor, producer looking for projects. And I think this was his first and potentially only project that was, so it was because also of Catalyst recognizing these obstacles that all the other films from our class, documentaries from our class, were funded and released before we even finished. And so they diversified, and then that's how Tommy Oliver came in from Confluential Films, recognizing Nikki. He basically said, I just pray it's not a bad film. I'm there. And he loved it and supported it and advocated for it and for our vision. Sorry, I can answer that about how did we deal with is this about her being uncooperative, Nikki?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so there are a couple of things. One, our son was uncooperative in American Promise, and we negotiated boundaries that didn't make it into the camera, but we definitely negotiated boundaries with him. And I would say that it was a benefit that she was so transparent about where she was willing to go. And this is in part why, the title of the film is the Nikki Giovanni Project. It's kind of an ode to the film, The Stewart Hall Project by Jana Comfrey. I don't know if people have seen that, but it's really about delving into what her project is. What does space mean? What does the Black community mean to her? It's not a biographical, film that goes through or tries to reveal secrets. That's not what our focus was, or reveal things that she didn't want to reveal. It's about understanding the impact of her poetry. And what we did is we sort of flipped this idea of participants' uncooperativeness and put it front and center, not so much as a lifting of the fourth wall, but as a device to better understand her as a character, understanding her unapologetic nature, understanding how she moves in the world. So these moments were really about revealing character than about looking at it from a perspective as this is how far we could go. And the truth of the matter is, all of her intimacy and vulnerability is in her poetry. And so we turn to that poetry also as a device for revealing her personality and her character too. I don't know if you want to add something, Joe.
I've never had a subject who was not resistant to revealing large parts of their lives, and that's something you had to encourage and nurture over the course of making the film. I think that there were areas that Nikki was prickly, but she is a woman who basically would do most of anything we asked. And so, but again, that comment, and we've done it before, is used to establish character. But I also think that no, I'm going to leave it there. I'm
And we you know, we made very specific choices about certain poems that she refused to read that we felt were extremely important for us to have in. And so and we found creative ways of including them. So I would say that it's not so much that she was uncooperative, because you always find obstacles with all participants you work with. The question is whether you actually transparently include that the way we did, which we feel is really about revealing who she is and her unapologetic nature. And it builds to us understanding that complexity. But I think, well, I like to think that for me, the intention of putting that in is not just revelatory, but there's something that I can relate to in terms of this refusal to go into dark places that we should respect as filmmakers. We should respect, you know, as an audience, and kind of connect with our own sense of privacy with certain things, without necessarily with understanding the vulnerability at the same time.
it's the same dilemma in American Promise. Or sometimes we sacrifice our character as a maker to make a larger point. And I do believe that that we are also dramatists, and that point in the film, no one ignores it. It's a little peak on the dramatic scale.
Yeah,
And
it causes people to lean in. It causes, oh, what am I watching here? Oh, this is really interesting. There is an intentionality, let me tell you, with every frame in this film in Going to Mars.
so someone described it the lean-in film, because if you go to a screening, people are leaning forward as the film progresses, because we're hitting you with these moments frequently, not in terms of just what she says, but how we juxtapose images, opposite images. Can you kill? They're dancing, they're smiling. What does that mean? And it forces you as a viewer to think about that. And
think
it
also,
happens frequently
yeah, and
in
also it's
film.
the idea of when you make art and you lean into, you open, you expose, you do these things that for yourself sort of are stimulating, but we also can't control what the audience brings, right? But that's what's fascinating too. What I bring as an audience is my own lived experience, whether it be of suffering or my own issues with my parents or how I engage with art or however. I'm going to lay that on that film. The film's going to speak back to me, and there's going to be a back and forth that leads to something that hopefully is something transformative or eye-opening, you know, in that process.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to open it up to questions, and why don't we bring up Gordon?
Hey, Joe. Hey, Michelle. Should call you documentary. Yes, documentary royalty. And Brooklyn's in the house. Fort Greene. You know, one thing that I would like you to share if you can, and don't hit me when you see me. Can you speak about how the the collective has now moved from Fort Greene down to Baltimore. And and Jimmy Briggs says hello. Yeah, and thanks so much for this. This is, you guys are, and you know this, a true power couple, and the work continues to inform, educate, and enlighten. But yeah, how you now expanded and moved out and from New York, to Baltimore. Thanks, guys.
Well, we're going to disappoint you on that Baltimore thing, but let me just say this: we believe in the collective. One of the things we've been doing recently is inviting 10 people to our house every Sunday, every fourth Sunday, and because we don't talk film, but there's a lot of filmmakers there and a lot of artists, and what we notice is they're working together. And so we tried this in Baltimore. There are so many creatives who have moved to Baltimore because you can buy a house for a 20th of the price. Beautiful, and we did that in a place called Reservoir Hill. But I think we're New Yorkers. We were shooting a film.
It's been a transition that's still happening.
Okay.
So Sam Pollard has moved down there. Terrence Nance, Rada Blank. There are a lot of filmmakers, families, and I think they're trying to create something. They're even creating their own film studio. I think it's a way of doing what was happening naturally in New York 2 or 3 decades ago. But it's difficult because a lot of the makers there have to leave the city for work. So it's that those dinners are not occurring. Like right. You can open the door in Brooklyn and you got 6 filmmakers coming in asking for a pizza, but that's not the vibe there. So we look forward to doing more there, but right now our home is New York, maybe Mexico. But thanks.
Please.
But just to add very quickly, we are connected to, there is something about Baltimore that makes it also easier. You say we walk out, but, Sean Peters and other folks there, there's a level of spontaneity. There's a level of spontaneity that is heartwarming when we are down there, but not down there as often as we'd like to be. But yeah. Even being able to have brunch with Sam Pollard is easier in Baltimore than here. So,
yeah. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. And I am super pro Baltimore, but that's because I live half an hour away from it. So, AK.
Hello, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I'm curious if you can speak briefly to the business side of things and how your approach to the money to make this work has evolved over the years. I mean, I know as superstars, you get a lot of public support, but sometimes it's not enough to finish a film. But from what I'm as an emerging filmmaker understanding is that can really get in the way of these deals. So I'm curious about how Tommy came in. Did HBO come in after? Usually if you have public money, it becomes really difficult to make deals with networks. And how do you approach that now going forward? I know Tommy's a big proponent of we need to understand and be entrepreneurs and understand the business. But when most people still don't like talking about money, it's hard for emerging filmmakers to really wrap their head around that stuff. So just curious.
Well, going to Mars has no public money, and we were very intentional about that. We wanted to keep our independence as long as possible in terms of commitment, because we felt that you know, we wanted to keep all the doors open. So we really worked with foundation and grant money until as far as we could. And unfortunately, you know, there's a huge long list of foundations that supported us and nonprofits, but it's still not enough to close the gap.
Wow.
So you have to go either public or some kind of investor looking for returns. And that's where Catalyst came in. And then 5 years later, with Catalyst came Tommy. And Tommy came in June of last year, of 2022. And he was able to put in a substantial sort of support that allowed us to get to Sundance. But we came into Sundance with no deal. Like, it was all independent production.
But
And
I think
that's
you're
where she asked if HBO came in. HBO didn't come in until later this year.
I think on a less granular level, we have been toying with the idea of money and fundraising. And so we have a couple of tracks, right? So we have relationships that will help smaller filmmakers. And so the people who funded us earlier, we go to them with projects that we support. And so it's a very exciting time to find young filmmakers who don't know the way, and then we can introduce them to people who have enough money to make the $400,000 film or the $200,000 film. But the larger films, really, we are still struggling with. The interesting thing is we get asked a lot to meet with people to pitch projects.
Yeah.
And we've been trying to figure out how much we can do and how much we can help other people do, because that is the future. It's like that community thing is not just about the project that we do. It's the project that we can help get made, that needs to be made. And unfortunately, Michelle thinks every project that comes to her
Should be made.
needs to be made, and it's killing our bandwidth.
She's right. Do you take more than 10%? Well, we can talk about that.
But generally, those are projects that where they, Michelle speaks 5 languages, so any other language she thinks needs to be made. But what I am saying is that it's very hard for us now to make an extremely low budget film, and what we try to do is create partners even within our team so that we can continue to make those kinds of films, as well as the bigger films. We've been working with our DP on American Promise for how many years? 5 years.
Yeah, 5 years. 5 years on his first feature doc.
And we can't announce it yet, but he'll be, on public television with a beautiful film in a few months. But one of the things I wanted to say is that sometimes it's not about the money. It's about the film. And so, yes, after we spend all of this time talking about the way we are perceived, but a lot of times they come to us with verite pieces, personal documentaries. And those personal documentaries require a certain level of personal understanding before they click. So we spent 2-3 years getting people to accept, oh shit, this film is about me and my relationship and my trauma, and I got to work that through so that I can make these characters work. That's not about money, but that is I don't want to say things that people already know, but what I am saying is it's more difficult now than it's ever been. And I would pair myself up with someone who I can trust and has some access, because that's the reality of the game. But but there are upsides that are amazing as well going on right now. Interesting projects. Anyway, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. We're coming up on just a couple minutes left, and I know Doug had one more question that he didn't get a chance to ask, so let's bring him back.
Okay. Yeah, just wanted to first of all thank you again both for like a terrific session, and so glad that you just basically carried on the discussion yourselves, which was fantastic. We're Academy members, so we see each other there, and we talk a lot about the state of documentary filmmaking today, the good and the bad and the ugly. And I'd love to go out with a final comment from you about where you think documentary is at now, where it could be fixed. It's a big question, you go down the funding route, the distribution route, and all that. But maybe what do you see? Do you see any hopeful signs as well?
Well, I think that's a question for Ted Hope.
Yeah.
And so, but our solution is called the Chitlin Circuit. And I know it's a term that most people know, but what I am saying is that is the circuit that's always supported us. And so if I want to be a star and make the $3 million doc about someone that we all know, there are so many compromises, and that journey is going to take so long. And so we've elected to make films and try to create new distribution models. And it's always occurred. And over the last few years, we got transfixed with this Apple, Netflix pipeline, the $8 million doc. It's not sustainable. It's not real. It's what's the gold ring that we're trying to obtain. And so all I'm saying is that I know people want that, but it's almost like being an NBA player. There's very few people are going to have that. So if you want a sustainable career, you want and to build that over the time, there is an upside. You play to your markets, you change the world, because those markets are not, those markets don't exist in the Apple programming or the Netflix programming. And so, Michèle, well,
No, I agree. I mean, I think it is about what do we see as distribution? What do we see as audience? And I think there is a lot of conversation happening around distribution models. I was recently in Mexico at the Morelia Film Festival, understanding that Mexico has one of the highest rates of audiences going to theaters in all of the Americas. But those statistics are not brought up. Reanalyzing that, and there are a lot of sort of distributors from Cinema Tropical to Karen Tien and people working on reorienting and thinking about it. But there's a larger also conversation around ecosystem that I didn't come into this field to do commercial film, right? And I think a lot of us pre-streamers, that's not what we were doing. It was by all means not a pristine or satisfactory ecosystem. We were having really important conversations. And I sometimes liken the fact that these streamers came in to this ecosystem the same way Uber and Lyft came in and destroyed the yellow cab system, and that had to be roaring in. And then they left and started charging more than our yellow cabs, right? And then we became dependent on this system, right? And so I feel like the streamers came in with this craziness that was nothing but a bubble, that now caters to the 3 C's. An editor I know mentioned, Penny Falk, like, true crime, celebrity, and cults, and have created their own genre. That's a money-making genre. And if you want to join that, that's fine. But let's not call that independent documentary film. So we don't sort of collapse that definition, because then we hide behind a facade that is all about just making money and not informing and feeding and nurturing, which I feel is what, the independent nonfiction space is about. So the question is now, right, with these collapsing, now they're retracting, they're taking it out. We get advisories that say we don't want anything political from the Netflixes and all of that, which causes a certain set. I mean, I won't even go into the idea of censorship here, right? Which is a larger conversation, could be a whole other,
But I also want to point out.
Let me finish 1 second. The question now is, how do we flip this into opportunity and think about ways that now we can truly support each other in this community and understand what does it mean to be independent in this space?
I also want to point out, because we're going to be cut off, we probably have another meeting in 30 seconds. The notion of the collective. There are a bunch of film collectives right now. My son has a film collective. There's 10 of them. And they pay salaries, livable salaries in Brooklyn. They fundraise together, they create together. And and so that's a way of making work and creating sustainability that's always worked. I would just like to end by saying this: we have always needed story, and we don't even have to tell these stories in film. The best lawyer is the country lawyer. The best preacher is the person who inspires us, if that's your thing, with his story. So there'll never be a time when we don't need the work that we're doing. Let's figure out the way of telling the story in multiple ways. We've been using VR and AR for the last few years, and it's been our most exciting storytelling. We haven't been able to figure out the distribution, but our son is doing quite well in that arena. So I want to thank you for listening to us babble. And we didn't get too political with you, because we can do that too. But I want to say that something that I've said, and I don't think people believe it, that community is everything, and it exists in so many ways. And if we don't work together and understand how we work together, I would say the money making, the capitalism of filmmaking is going to destroy us or win out. And so thank you, Doug. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Lord. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Joe and Michelle. Thank you so much. It's so great having you here. And thank you, everybody, for coming in, joining us today.